As we welcome in now, CBS Sports NFL lead insider Jonathan Jones, live with us from Chargers training camp. Ryan Wilson, our NFL draft expert. So, guys, the Dolphins really penalized here by Roger Goodell and the NFL. JJ, I'll start with you. The penalty in terms of losing the draft picks, the fine for Stephen Ross, obviously everything that involves with the tampering that they dealt with here. What do the Dolphins do as a result of this? How do they recover with the loss of the draft picks?
Well, I mean, this is a pretty big deal. I mean, we're talking about the greatest quarterback of all time that the Miami Dolphins were tampering with while he was a member of their division rival, the New England Patriots. And then they did it again when he was a member of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and asking him to be a limited partner, potentially a football executive, potentially playing for the Miami Dolphins. That is textbook tampering in the NFL, and they were pretty, according to these findings, egregious about it. And the conduit was a part owner of the Miami Dolphins, Bruce Beal, the NFL found. And so he was having those conversations with Brady, who, by the way, I don't know of any NFL rule that Tom Brady can't talk to other teams. Just other teams can't talk to Tom Brady. So if anyone's looking for any punishment for Brady, I am highly doubtful that any would be coming or even should be coming. Then they tried to wrangle in Sean Payton to be their head coach before they hired Mike McDaniel. But interestingly enough, they also tried to talk to Sean Payton through his agent before Sean Payton announced his retirement from the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, they had seen the smoke signals that he may be done. They didn't go through the proper channels to speak with the Saints to request permission to speak with Sean Payton before that retirement. And then when they tried to finally request that permission, the Saints declined that request. And so that's all very interesting. And it all came really from Brian Flores' initial lawsuit where he talked about a prominent quarterback that the Dolphins had tried to get him to tamper with that he walked away from. The other issues that Brian Flores brought up, the intentional tanking, the $100,000 that he was offered per loss. The NFL did not find that any of that actually took place. The NFL found that if that comment was made, they said it may have been a joke, but that while Stephen Ross did very much care more about the 2020 draft position than the 2019 win-loss record, he did not direct his team to lose football games. And so that part of Brian Flores' lawsuit that made a number of headlines, the NFL looked into it. They are saying that there is no evidence for it. I'd have to imagine, though, Brian Flores would probably disagree with that.
JJ, you talk about the egregiousness of the allegations and the findings, and my first thought was maybe the Dolphins got tired of losing to the Patriots and now the Bills and said, well, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying, because that's how obvious it seemed to me what they were doing. You mentioned Sean Payton's involvement and his agent. His agent's Don Yee, and JJ, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's Tom Brady's agent as well. So they had Don Yee on the phone a lot to figure out what they could do with Don Yee's clients in order to improve the Miami Dolphins. And on the one hand, I get it. You're trying to improve your football team. On the other hand, these rules are in place for a reason, and this is more than a slap on the wrist. A lot of times we give the NFL some gruff for not being tough when it hands out punishments either to players, coaches, or owners. This seems pretty severe. We can get into a little bit more in a moment, I suppose. Turns out the Dolphins do have 2 first-round picks next year, but still 1 first-round pick that you're losing. You had the quarterback situation, Tua Tagovailoa, who was at the center of this tanking for Tua, those allegations that were just disproven, as JJ mentioned. So you have a lot of things to sort out now with fewer resources, and this is going to be a big year for Tua, certainly, but it also is a huge shines a huge spotlight on what Stephen Ross and the limited owner were trying to do in order to improve a football team that has struggled in this division for more than a decade now.
JJ, when you talk about tampering and the things that are, they're being accused of, and obviously finding that they violated, are we going to see a situation here where maybe Stephen Ross is forced to sell the team?
I don't think that Stephen Ross is necessarily going to be forced to sell the team. I thought as soon as the Brian Flores lawsuit dropped and I read about the tanking allegations, I read the $100,000 comment to intentionally lose games that, again, the NFL is saying it may or may not have been said. Some context may have been missing. It may have been a joke if it were said. I thought if that would be proven, that there was no question that Stephen Ross would be forced to sell the team because this drives right at the heart of the integrity of the game. Interestingly enough, and I mentioned this earlier, and the NFL points out in its investigative findings that Stephen Ross did care more about his 2020 draft position than his 2019 win-loss record, that he wanted to build a winning culture within that organization and empowered Brian Flores to do that, but cared more about the draft position for 2020. The only thing that impacts the draft position in any year is your win-loss record. It's not how good guys feel about a close win or a close loss. It's winning and losing. And so these two things are a bit paradoxical. You can't have one and not have the other. So that's just one of the things that really stands out while the NFL doesn't find that there was any intentional tanking. Stephen Ross cared more about the draft position, and you get better draft position when you lose games.
Ryan, when you mentioned this in terms of the draft picks that the Dolphins have, they lose theirs, but now they have the 49ers pick next year as a result of the trade that they made prior to last year's draft. How much is this going to impact their future? You talked about Tua and just, everything they're looking at with him, but just in terms of where the Dolphins go now from dealing with their draft, dealing with their future, how much pressure now, as you alluded to, more so on Tua, more so on Mike McDaniel?
Right. So losing one draft pick, first round, that's terrible. The good news is you have another draft pick as part of that Trey Lance deal from last year's draft that you mentioned, Jamey. So that's the good news. The Dolphins didn't have a ton of draft picks a few months ago either as part of the deal to get Tyreek Hill. So they didn't pick until round 3. They had some needs to fill. They did some of that in free agency. So now they have to hope that Jalen Waddle comes out in year 2 like he did in year 1. They have to hope Tyreek Hill is exactly who he was in Kansas City. And more than anything else, they have to hope that Tua Tagovailoa is worth the 5th overall pick. Because don't forget, they drafted Tua over Justin Herbert. And I didn't think Justin Herbert would be as good as he was based on how he played in Oregon. I thought Tua would probably be better than he is right now based on what he did at Alabama. The hip injury probably had something to do with that. And I think it's interesting, and JJ touched on this, Stephen Ross was sort of wanting to tank for Tua, but not really, however you want to phrase it. He should have been thinking about Justin Herbert, it turns out. And again, so Tua Tagovailoa has a ton to prove this year. And if he comes out and plays well early on, they can focus on other issues. If he comes out and struggles and he throws 5 interceptions and has 4 touchdowns through a couple weeks, the conversation is going to turn to the draft. And they will also be looking to the West to see what Trey Lance and the 49ers do, because that will determine their draft position with that other first-round pick that the 49ers had to give up. So there are a lot of moving parts here. Ideally, you would just take care of your own house, and that includes Tua playing well. But if Tua starts to slip, then you start to look out West and see how the 49ers are doing, because that will determine what your draft position will be. And again, as we sit here in early August, there are probably 4 or 5 quarterbacks that will be in the first-round conversation. Say that every August. And they will have to determine, the Dolphins, what they want to do from there.
Lots of moving parts, as you said, Ryan. I'm sure the Pick 6 podcast will cover that, featuring Will Brinson, Brian Wilson, and crew. You can check it out wherever podcasts are available. Again, the Dolphins having to forfeit multiple draft picks, being fined as a result of violating tampering laws based on the NFL's ruling. So a lot to get to here, more so on CBS Sports HQ on this developing story with the Miami Dolphins.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.